Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a couple of my European Nightcrawler worm bins. Yeah, this is the side of my bench that you guys normally don't get to see. I usually just crop this out of the view or don't even include it, but you can see here I've got a number of different things in progress. I've been collecting pumpkin seeds to make worm chow. I've got eggshell that I'm going to make grit out of. I've even got some pepper seeds out here to dry. These don't look so good. But the systems that we're going to be checking in on are over here. They're now 140 days, that's 20 weeks of age. These systems are a little bit interesting because over here in bin number 1, we've been running a test with a compostable bag. The compostable bag test actually predates these bins by quite a bit. The compostable bag was started way back when these worms lived in their previous home. So I think they're due for a feeding. It's been 11 days and that last feeding they got was pretty minuscule in size. So we're going to get these systems up on the bench and get them fed. So let's get started. Over here in bin number 1 where the compostable bag is, we usually take care to excavate the feeding zone without damaging, well, it's pretty damaged already just from having been in the worm bins for so long, but I do attempt to not contribute to the breakdown of the compostable bag over here by trying to unearth it carefully and then setting it aside until we have an opportunity to return it back into the feeding zone with a minimal amount of impact caused by simply us handling it. So we'll do that again today. In the beginning it seemed like we would keep checking in on the thing over and over and over again, rarely seeing anything that resembled, progress. But more recently the compostable bag has been definitely showing signs of wear. You can see some signs of the foods that they got recently. I don't think it was in the last feeding. I think these pieces of orange peel go back 2 feedings now. There had been maybe 10 days prior and then 11 days this time, so that's 21 days. That's 3 weeks on the orange peel, and there's still a nice orangey scent to it. And I've found that orange peels are pretty popular. Here's another citrus food item that goes back even further. This is a chunk of the inside of a pineapple. Really, really fibrous, still pretty juicy. It even shows a few worms hanging out on it. So let's see if we can get to the position in the feeding area where the compostable bag was left. I usually try to position it on top of some of the newly added foods. I can really smell the orange at this point. Here we've got a couple, one here, and there's going to be one over in bin number 2 as well. This is a seed from a mango, and it was possibly, I think it might have even been as recently as the last check-in that we finally managed to crack these seeds open and give the worms access to the inside. And I could see some of the fibers starting to unravel and open up on this thing. And I always feel like I've got to be careful because the springiness, the tension I'm sensing here as I try to spread the thing open a little bit for you to see inside is pretty intense. If it were to slip, it would probably go flying halfway across the room. So let's not tempt fate with that any further. Let's just press on. I am getting to the middle here, and I'm assuming we're going to eventually encounter the compostable bag. See, we were pretty generous with the bedding in recent times. There's plenty of it floating around over here, and I've got it on standby. I was going to include some of it again today. Okay, are we ever going to reach the compostable boat? I think I see bits and pieces of it. Is that it right there? Let's see if we can just kind of do a wholesale excavation of this section of the feeding zone. Because I believe that Some of this over here is just the very thin, pretty much translucent skin of some cherry tomatoes. You can even see some tomato seeds in there. So I had found some tomatoes from a previous feeding. Last time we were still encountering some of them that had not even been burst of their skin was still holding intact. So we attempted to burst them all just to make sure that the worms have access to the inside of those juicy tomatoes. And as you can see, I use this banana peel as the bait, if you will, to try to lure worms in the direction of the compostable bag. Another thing that we did, I believe it was 2 check-ins ago, was that we attempted to untie this little knot that I had put onto this bag over on the open end of it in the very beginning, to try to spare worms from accidentally crawling inside of the bag and then finding themselves trapped in there, unable to gain access to food and the other things that they need. So the material was really protected by being trapped within that knot that had been tied onto the end of the bag. So that little bit of the material was sort of freed from being in that protective state. So I believe there is going to be a small section of this which might look like it's evaded wear over time, and that would be because of what we did in the very beginning by tying it off. So I think we can go a little bit more aggressively now that we've removed the object in here that we attempted to avoid causing damage to. And we've got leftover scraps all over the place, little bits of food here and there. Here's a piece of a corn cob. So at some point when we're returning all these food scraps down into the feeding area and giving them their new portion of food, I'll be trying to gather up all these old bits and pieces that we excavated along the way. I'm just going to have to remember some banana peel over here. There's the stem of a pepper. The compostable bag is over here on top of the mango seed. And there's some other various stuff like orange peels and things over here. So we'll just do our best to gather those things up and return them back down into the feeding zone. Not that it's so important. It really doesn't matter in the end, I guess. But I do like to try to focus the foods that the worms have been getting back down into the feeding area, just so we can keep tabs on how they're coming along. Basically, that's really my main motivation. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't matter so much if the material was sort of blended in throughout the system. So here we're going to bump into very similar items as we saw in bin number 1. Here's some orange peel. This was the peel of a banana as well as the stem right there of it. And here we actually still see a little bit of the color of a somewhat larger tomato that had been placed in here. But over here in the other system, I guess here's one that's still holding on to its color too a little bit. But for the most part, these have been stripped down to just the very thin, almost see-through skin of the tomato, where almost everything that had any pigment has already been gobbled up by the wormies. So what else do we have down here? Oh, I think we know what we have. It's just a matter of getting to it. Oh, here we go. This is kind of what I was looking for, because I'm always curious to see how... Oh, there I go. Not taking care and ending up with castings spraying all over me. So here again, the mango seed that we kind of tore open last time to give worms access. Does seem like worms are taking advantage of the route that we gave them down into the seed. And here's that chunk of pineapple. There's all kinds of leftovers in here, and as you can imagine, just based on what I've been describing up until now, some of these things do take a long time. And that's the main reason I tend to freeze most of the stuff that I give to my worm bins, just because it does seem to help a lot in the breakdown process. Once something freezes and sort of the moisture content crystallizes, that crystallization of the moisture does seem to sort of alter the cellular structure of the vegetable and fruit matter and make it a little bit easier for the worms to get at it just by having been sort of broken up by the power of moisture freezing. And then by thawing, all the moisture sort of gets released. That is also something that the worms really seem to like. Here's an interesting item that's definitely making nice progress at this point. It's the stem of a pumpkin. And just based on the way it looks, it seems like it's been in here for some time now. All right, we've got a little wormy over here. It's trying to escape. Let's get them back down into the bed. Sorry guys, I'm being disruptive enough that it is causing them a little bit of distress, making them want to flee, but I think it's time to come in here with my prepared bedding, and we'll drop in a nice generous handful of that into both of the feeding zones here, and then we can come in with today's foods. Today's foods includes a little unusual stuff. I mean, some of the stuff that you see in here is very routine as far as banana peel, cucumber, and even some old moldy bread, all frozen. But the other stuff that you see down here, these green leaves, are something that I spotted at my mom's house. She had received some flowers for her birthday. It was a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, and she was sort of trimming some stems and leaves off of some tulips. And these are the leaves and stems of some tulip. And they seem so juicy and full of moisture, even the leaves. I figured it seemed like it was a shame to, you know, trash it. So I asked her to give it to me so I can bring it home. She's always collecting all kinds of stuff, eggshells and food scraps and other household waste cardboard that she sets up little care packages for me and sends them home so I can give them to the worms and dispose of them a little bit more responsibly than if it was all just placed into the trash. These little guys, they don't like this check-in, it seems. I'm causing worms to want to climb the walls. So over here, I think we'll do a similar thing. We'll lay down a little base that hopefully will attract a good bit of worm traffic. For that matter, I think that this chunk of cucumber would also work really well to attract worm traffic. So we'll place the compostable bag smack in the middle of that stuff over there in the hopes that it causes the wormies to come over for it. And then while they're there, to continue working down that compostable bag. And before we cover up the feeding zone, we're going to pop in here with a little bit of grit. In my case, I use pulverized eggshell as grit in my worm bin feedings. Did we get everything? I think there was stuff over here too, yeah. Let's not forget anything. Not that it matters, like I said before. If it was just blended in elsewhere, it wouldn't be a problem, but I do like to try to focus what I'm putting into the worm bins. So the other thing I attempt to dispose of responsibly is all the coffee that piles up around here on a regular basis. So that is a staple sort of item that almost goes into every one of my worm bin feedings. Stuff's been sitting around for a little while, so it's a bit drier than usual. And in the very beginning, I noticed that we did have feeding zone indicators resting out on top of the feeding zones. So I've got some replacement coffee filters that we could lay out as replacement feeding zone indicators, but I also got this stuff here. When I make my worm chow, I try to get it really, really fine like this, almost like powder consistency. So I run it through a kitchen sieve, and whatever gets caught in the sieve, I rest aside, and then I keep putting it back in the blender, but eventually it starts to add up, because in the end, whatever doesn't get broken up small enough to suit my liking, I've just been putting it into here and gathering it up for a few sessions now of creating worm chow, and it seemed like at some point I'd like to just get it into a few worm bins. And there's some other stuff over here, and I'm thinking it's almost a year now. It's almost a year since my old shredder broke down, and these were some clues to the fact that the shredder was dying. It was the fact that it wasn't really creating shreds, it was creating these little waffle shaped chunks of cardboard. So the cardboard was just something that the device was starting to struggle with and not create shreds anymore. It was just kicking out stuff that looked like this. And I don't know why I set it aside. It just seemed like an interestingly shaped chunk of cardboard, a couple of them that I set aside, but you know, keeping stuff like that around just takes up space, has no real purpose. I figured it's time to get rid of it and give it to the wormies, so there they go, making some space out here on my bench. Alright, so let's use the covering up of the feeding zones as our excuse to plow through the outer edges of the bins just to aerate and inspect. And I guess it's probably going to result in a few agitated worms again. Hopefully not so much that we're going to continue to see worms trying to climb out of their environment, but I do like tilling up the outer edges just to give a little bit of airflow into those areas, and just to make sure things are looking pretty good. It did seem to me like stuff was pretty damp out there, so probably doesn't hurt also that we're sort of surfacing some of the material and getting it out near the areas where there's perhaps a little bit more airflow going on. I mean, it is true that we're covering up with plastic here, resulting in pretty much no airflow right below the plastic, but around the edges where the plastic doesn't reach all the way to the outer walls of the container, it does seem like there's sometimes a little bit of an opportunity for stuff to kick off its moisture content, so perhaps we could even return the plastic covering in such a way that it provides a little bit more airflow. But then, you know, I don't know, systems that are still as young as these, 140 days of age, it does seem to me like keeping things nice and damp and comfortable so that the worms are inclined to cruise the entire contents of the container versus just trying to seek out damp areas. It does seem like it's the way to go. So yeah, maybe we won't worry so much about trying to dry things off here. We'll just leave things kind of damp. Here it seems like we had a little chunk of paper. Perhaps this was some of our feeding zone indicator from last time. Like I've said, I got a collection of coffee filters that we can utilize for putting out some replacement feeding zone indicators, and we'll do just that once I finish tilling up this edge of bin number 2. Because at this point we will have completed our check-in, inspection of the compostable bag, examination of leftovers, application of food bedding and grit, aeration of the outer edges, and last but not least, the positioning of a couple feeding zone indicators. Just because I like to do it as tradition, not because I think I would have a hard time locating where we last fed. It's pretty routine too. I almost always feed down the middle, so feeding zone indicators are more fun than functional in my worm bins. Although I do have a couple systems where I do alternate the location where I feed, and in those cases it does make a little bit more sense to mark where you last fed just to keep track in case it wasn't clear and obvious. But in systems like these, which are pretty much the template for how I manage almost all my systems, feeding down the middle is kind of my routine. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in with the European night crawlers, day 120. Day 120? No, day 140, 20 weeks in service. This was feeding number 13 and they're doing great. So I guess we'll probably have a little bit of a reunion with some of the worms that came out of the same material that these were extracted from in the early days, because after these two systems were launched, I still had some castings with straggler worms in it that I managed to round up, but those worms didn't come in here. They were put into a time-lapse container, and the time-lapse is nearing its end. So the next time we check in with these guys, it is very likely that we'll be emptying the time-lapse container into one of these containers here and having a little bit of a family reunion. So a little something to look forward to. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.